I'll never forget that Sunday evening at the Walker Ranch. The oak dining table was set for 12, the smell of roasted turkey and corn pudding filling the air. Yet my stomach was twisted so tight I couldn't swallow a thing. You see, my mother, Evelyn, had called this special dinner without saying why and when. My kid brother Caleb rolled in, wearing a brand new Stetson hat and a smirk I'd only seen once before. When he convinced Dad to sign over the tractor rights, I knew something was off. But I stayed quiet. I'd been doing that for 45 years, ever since I gave up college to keep this place running, while Dad's lungs failed, and while Caleb took off to Vegas chasing a dream of fast money and even faster women. I thought loyalty would mean something. I thought family blood was thicker than envy, but I was wrong. Dead wrong. Friends. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted more than life itself, you're going to feel every second of what happened next. And before I go further, I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your state or country in the comments, because this story, well, it's for every person who's ever been thrown out by their own kin and told they weren't enough. And hey, if this is your first time hearing one of my stories, welcome to the family. Hit that subscribe button, because here we tell the truth the way it happens, messy, raw, and unforgettable. So there we were, 12 of us, jammed around that table under the glow of the same chandelier Dad hung himself back in '79. I remember the flicker in the lights when Evelyn stood up, tapping her wine glass like she was about to toast a wedding. She looked right past me like I was a shadow, and with a smile as cold as January frost, she said, "I've decided the ranch needs new leadership. Caleb has proven himself capable, ambitious. The future of Walker Farms." Then she slid a thick manila folder across the table to Caleb, her ruby ring catching the light like a dagger in my chest. Caleb opened it slowly, knowing full well I was watching, and pulled out the property deeds. Not shared, not equal. Full ownership of everything: our land, our cattle, even the house Dad built with his bare hands. My hands started to shake under the table, but I kept my face still. For years I'd swallowed every insult every time Evelyn said Caleb was more like his father, while she treated me like a ranch hand living on borrowed time. But this was different. This was erasing me. "You can't be serious." I finally said, my voice low but sharp enough to slice the room into silence. Evelyn didn't flinch. "Daniel," she said, tilting her head like she pitied me, "you've done your part. You're steady. But steady doesn't win in this world anymore. Caleb is the one who can grow this business. You'll still have a place here if you need it, maybe a cabin out back or some seasonal work. That's fair." Around me, my cousins avoided eye contact, forks frozen mid-air. Caleb leaned back in his chair, twirling Dad's old ranch key on his finger like a trophy. At that moment, I realized the ranch wasn't just being handed away, it was being stolen from under me while the whole family watched. My blood boiled, my chest burned, but I swallowed the fire like I always had. Dad's photograph on the mantel seemed to watch me, his faded blue eyes saying what I couldn't. "Son, stand tall." So I nodded, once grabbed my worn denim jacket from the hook, and said I understand completely. Evelyn's face softened, like she thought I'd accepted defeat. Caleb grinned like he'd won. But they had no idea what was coming. That night, as I drove down the long gravel road in my rusted Ford, leaving behind every acre I'd spent my life holding together, I promised myself something I wouldn't beg for scraps. I'd come back not to take revenge, but to make sure the Walker name finally stood for justice, and nothing, not Evelyn's schemes nor Caleb's greed, would stop me. I wish I could tell you that walking out of that house that night was the hardest part, that once I hit the gravel road, everything made sense. But life doesn't give you clean breaks, not when it's your own blood cutting you open. That night, I slept in my truck outside the county feed store, staring at the dashboard clock tick past 3 a.m., every second drilling the truth deeper. I wasn't just losing the ranch, I was losing the family I'd sacrificed everything to protect. And here's the cruel part. They didn't even care enough to call. Morning came with frost on the windshield, my hands numb from the cold as I clutched Dad's old leather hat, the only thing I grabbed when I left. I thought of all those years I patched fence lines alone, stayed up through tornado nights hauling calves to safety, while Caleb partied in Vegas, or when Evelyn pawned off bills on me saying, "You're responsible, Daniel. You can handle it." I handled it all. Right up until they decided I wasn't good enough for my own name. 2 days later, I came back to collect my things, thinking I'd quietly pack up and slip out. But Evelyn made sure it wasn't quiet. When I walked through the front door, half the town was there for what they called a celebration of new leadership. Caleb stood on the front porch with a glass of champagne, reporters snapping photos like he'd just cured cancer, not stolen his brother's life's work. Evelyn spotted me from across the yard and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear, "Daniel, please don't make this awkward. You're lucky we're letting you stay on as a labourer." Most folks wouldn't get that much. I froze. That word, labourer, echoed like a hammer on an anvil. My cousin Linda whispered to her husband, "He's really not taking it well, like I was some weakling who couldn't accept change." Caleb walked up, flashed that same smug grin from dinner, and dangled the ranch keys in front of me. "Don't take it personal, big brother," he said, voice slick as oil. "This is just business. You're not a leader. You never were." Then, for good measure, he slipped Dad's worn-out Stetson onto his own head, the one Dad swore only I had earned. That hat looked wrong on him, but Evelyn clapped like Caleb had been crowned king. I felt my heart crack, not just from losing land or money, but from realizing my own mother had been planning this for years. That folder at dinner. It wasn't new, Grace. My childhood friend, who'd gone off to law school later, told me she'd overheard Evelyn at the courthouse months ago, filing ownership transfers behind my back. My signature forged on documents I'd never seen. She'd already decided Caleb was the heir, and I was just the hired help. That night, I drove to the far pasture one last time. I stood by the old oak tree Dad used to rest under its bark, carved with our initials from when I was a boy. I ran my hand over those letters, rough and worn, and I swear I heard Dad's voice in the rustling leaves, "Son, they've forgotten what you've done for them. But don't you forget who you are." Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not in front of Caleb, not in front of Evelyn, not in front of the town that now believed their lies. Instead, I whispered to the wind, "This isn't over." Then I slid Dad's hat on my head, climbed into my truck, and drove away. Not beaten, not broken, but carrying a weight so heavy it would either crush me or forge me into something stronger than they'd ever imagined. And for those of you listening right now who've been betrayed by the people you trusted most, maybe your parents, maybe a sibling who stole what should have been yours, tell me in the comments, what did it feel like the moment you realized they never truly saw you? Because for me, that moment changed everything. By the third night, sleeping in my truck, I started to understand something that had been sitting in my gut for years. Staying silent hadn't made me strong. It had made me invisible. I spent my entire life keeping the ranch alive, fixing other people's mistakes, letting Evelyn and Caleb believe they were steering the ship while I kept it from sinking. Now, stripped of everything, I had a choice: crawl back, beg for scraps like they expected, or rise up in a way they'd never see coming. I drove 2 hours east to an old run-down storefront in Clearwater, a place most folks wouldn't give a second glance. But for me, that faded brick building meant hope. My childhood friend, Grace Miller, had turned it into her small law office after leaving the city. She'd always been sharp, fierce, in ways I never learned to be. I hadn't seen her in years, but when I walked through that glass door with my hat in my hands, she didn't ask questions. She just looked me dead in the eye and said, "They finally did it, didn't they?" We sat at her cluttered oak desk for hours, coffee gone cold between us. I told her everything, the staged celebration, The forged documents, Caleb's public humiliation. Grace listened, but instead of pity, there was a spark of anger in her eyes. "Daniel," she said, leaning forward, "you built that ranch. I know it, this whole county knows it. Evelyn and Caleb think you're done because you've always been quiet. What they don't know is that you've been preparing for this longer than they've been scheming." And she was right. You see, while Evelyn thought she was the mastermind running our family empire, I had been quietly running consulting gigs under a different name for years. Other ranch owners across the Midwest paid me to modernize their operations, better irrigation livestock management systems, tax-efficient expansions. Half the profits went back into Walker Farms just to keep it afloat when Evelyn and Caleb drained funds on their city shopping trips and Vegas weekends. They thought the ranch survived on luck, but it was my hands, my brains, keeping it alive. Grace and I dug through every old file I'd kept hidden, ledgers, unpaid invoices, bank statements, showing years of loans Caleb forged under my name. What Evelyn had called business decisions turned out to be reckless debts stacked on the land I poured my soul into. Grace's hands shook as she flipped through pages, muttering, "This isn't just betrayal. This is fraud." Still, I knew a straight-up lawsuit wouldn't cut it. Evelyn's connections ran deep. The county judge had been playing poker with her for decades. A quiet legal fight would get buried. I needed something bigger, something public, undeniable, and powerful enough to make Caleb and Evelyn realize I wasn't their silent mule anymore. That's when Grace suggested building my own network. "You've helped half the ranchers in this region," she said, pointing to my client list. "What if you showed them the truth? What if they backed you, not just as a neighbor, but as someone who understands how to save family land the right way?" It wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming the name they'd stolen. We worked late into the night, drafting plans, sending letters to old clients, digging through digital contracts Caleb signed without reading a word. My truck became my office, the diner down the road, my conference room. Every day I woke before sunrise, hitched rides to neighboring farms, offering free advice and lending a hand fixing busted equipment. Folks remembered what I'd done for them years ago, and slowly, one handshake at a time, support started building. Then came the first real sign we were onto something. Grace uncovered a hidden loan Caleb had taken out against the ranch, using my forged signature, a debt so big it could collapse Walker Farms if exposed. When I saw the document, my hands clenched into fists, but Grace stopped me from marching back home. "Not yet," she said softly. "We need them to believe you've disappeared. Let them think they won. That's when we'll hit them hardest." So I kept quiet. I drove past the ranch every night, watching from the ridge, as Caleb fumbled through decisions he didn't understand. Cattle wandered, unfenced equipment rusted in fields I once kept pristine. Evelyn stood on the porch, barking orders like a queen guarding a crumbling castle. And me, I stayed in the shadows, working, planning, becoming someone they'd never recognize until it was too late. For the first time in my life, I wasn't holding the ranch together for them. I was building a future they couldn't take from me. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about finally standing up to a family that had forgotten what loyalty, love, and sacrifice truly meant. Just when I thought the tide might finally start turning, Caleb struck back in ways only someone with Evelyn whispering in his ear could. Word traveled fast in our small county, and before long, folks started noticing my truck parked at other ranches, seeing my face at town hall meetings where I'd never been welcome before. Caleb must have heard, because one crisp Monday morning, I walked into the Clearwater Diner and saw my own name splattered across the front page of the Midwest Tribune disgraced Walker brother runs scam consulting business. Banned by local banks. I picked up the paper with trembling hands, scanning the lies Caleb had planted. Supposedly I'd stolen money from our family's trust, gambled away profits, and was now conning desperate ranchers. None of it true. But in a town where gossip moves faster than truth, it didn't matter. Clients started calling me worried. A few even backed out of our quiet alliance. Caleb had hit me where it hurt most, my reputation. Grace and I sat in her office that night, empty takeout boxes scattered between stacks of paperwork. She paced, chewing her lip, furious. "He's trying to cut you off from resources," she said. "If banks won't deal with you, you can't get loans. If your name's trashed, ranchers won't trust you. He's isolating you." And it worked. 1 week later, I walked into the Clearwater Savings and Loan to cash a check from a small job, and the teller, someone I'd known since childhood, leaned over the counter and whispered, "Daniel Caleb's been here. Told the board you're unstable. They're putting you on a watch list." My stomach dropped. They weren't just trying to steal my past, they were strangling my future before it even had a chance to start. The weight of it all hit me hardest one night when I returned to my truck to find a neon orange eviction notice stuck under the wiper. The old gas station lot where I'd been parking overnight had finally had enough. I climbed inside, shut the door, and for the first time since that cursed family dinner, I broke. My fists pounded the steering wheel, tears running hot down my face. I thought about Dad, about how he taught me to stand tall no matter what, and for a moment I felt like I'd failed him completely. That's when a small knock on the passenger window startled me. It was Emily, my 15-year-old daughter. She'd gotten word through a friend where I was staying and had biked 6 miles just to see me. I scrambled to wipe my face, but she saw everything. Without a word, she climbed in, wrapped her arms around me and said softly, "They don't know who you are, Daddy. But I do. Don't you let them win." Those words cut deeper than any betrayal Evelyn or Caleb had thrown at me. Emily had always been quiet, like me, often caught in the background of family feuds she didn't understand. But that night, she became my anchor. We sat in the truck till dawn, making a pact that no matter how ugly this fight got, we'd face it together. The next morning, Grace showed up with news that gave us a glimmer of hope she'd unearthed another bombshell. Hidden in county records was a massive loan Caleb had taken against the ranch, using my forged signature, something big enough to topple him if revealed properly. "We've got evidence now," Grace said, her eyes blazing with determination. "But if we play it wrong, Evelyn will bury this before it sees daylight." From that moment, we knew we had to outthink them, not just fight back head-on. I started working nights on a neighbouring farm for cash. Emily helping with bookkeeping, while Grace built a wall of evidence no court could ignore. It wasn't glamorous. My hands blistered. Clothes reeked of sweat and soil, and exhaustion sat heavy on my shoulders. But for the first time, it wasn't for Evelyn's approval or Caleb's benefit. It was for Emily, for the name they'd tried to erase from history. And yet, even with all this grit and planning, the pressure mounted. Caleb wasn't backing down. He filed fake complaints to the sheriff claiming I trespassed on Walker property. Evelyn showed up at town council meetings, painting me as an ungrateful son trying to destroy his mother's legacy. Every move we made, they countered with another dirty trick. But what Caleb and Evelyn didn't understand, and never would, was that every punch they threw only fueled the fire inside me. Every lie, every smear campaign, every sleepless night in that truck hardened my resolve. They thought they were watching me crumble. What they didn't see was the storm I was becoming. And when that storm finally broke, the Walker family name would never be the same again. By late spring, the pressure was unbearable. Caleb had tightened his grip on the ranch, slapping his name on every feed truck, every auction banner, parading himself as the visionary heir of Walker Farms. Evelyn backed him at every turn, hosting luncheons with state officials, donating to charities for press photos, all while whispering to anyone who'd listen that I'd gone rogue. The lies were so loud, I could feel them humming in my chest like a freight train. But there's something funny about storms. They seem endless until the first crack of lightning slices the sky. That lightning came the morning of the county fair, the biggest event of the year. Folks drove in from 4 counties lining up for pie contests, rodeos, and the grand livestock auction, where Caleb planned his final power move, selling a 500-acre section of ancestral Walker land. That land wasn't just dirt. It held the barn where Dad taught me to saddle my first horse, the creek, where Emily caught her first fish, the oak tree with our carved initials. If Caleb sold it, the Walker legacy would vanish forever. Grace and I knew we had one shot to stop it. The fairgrounds buzzed with music and chatter as I stood near the auction tent in a worn denim jacket blending into the crowd. Caleb strutted onto the makeshift stage in polished boots and a tailored vest, tipping his hat to the audience like some folk hero. Evelyn stood proudly beside him, diamonds flashing under the summer sun. As the auctioneer's voice thundered, starting the bid, I felt my pulse slam in my ears. Grace stood at the edge of the crowd, nodding subtly it was time. I stepped forward, my boots crunching the gravel, and called out, "Hold it!" The crowd turned whispers, rippling like wildfire. Caleb's grin faltered. Evelyn's eyes narrowed to slits. "What are you doing here?" Caleb barked, trying to sound confident but cracking around the edges. I walked up to the stage, slowly each step, deliberate, the sun glinting off a thick stack of papers in my hands. "I'm here," I said calmly, "to tell this county the truth about the so-called leader of Walker Farms." Gasps spread. As I held up documents Grace had meticulously gathered, loan agreements with my forged signature bank statements, showing Caleb siphoning ranch profits into personal accounts and tax records that painted a picture of systematic fraud. The sheriff himself stepped forward to take a closer look, his weathered face hardening with every page he flipped. Caleb lunged forward, voice cracking. "This is a lie." "He's bitter, because Mom finally picked someone capable." Evelyn jumped in, voice shrill. "Daniel, stop this nonsense before you embarrass yourself even more." I turned to the crowd, ignoring their protests. "For 45 years I bled for this ranch," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to carry over the PA system. "I missed college, lost friends, nearly lost my marriage. All to keep Walker Farms alive while they partied and gambled. And now Caleb wants to sell off the very ground our father built with his bare hands. But it's worse than greed, it's fraud. This," I said, holding up a single page with Caleb's forged loan, "is proof he's been destroying our legacy from the inside out." The auctioneer dropped his gavel. The crowd erupted, voices shouting questions, phones flashing pictures. Reporters swarmed the stage like bees to honey. Caleb's face drained of colour as the sheriff pulled him aside. Evelyn reached for him, but Grace intercepted, handing a copy of the evidence to a state investigator who had arrived for the fair. And then the final blow landed not from me, but from a neighbouring rancher named Tom Harper. He stepped onto the stage, gripping a microphone. "Daniel's telling the truth," Tom said, voice heavy with conviction. "He saved my ranch 2 years ago, while Caleb blew through company funds. We all owe him more than he's ever asked for. If this family's name means anything, it's Daniel who deserves to lead it, not a fraud." The crowd erupted in applause. Caleb shouted, face red, but no one listened. The sheriff cuffed him on the spot for forgery and fraud investigation. Evelyn stood frozen, her diamonds suddenly looking cheap under the harsh afternoon sun. Grace placed a hand on my shoulder, whispering, "It's over." But standing there watching Caleb dragged away, I realized something: it wasn't over. Not yet, because justice might have started that day at the county fair, but the true reckoning for the Walker name was just beginning. The county fair showdown shook the town like a summer thunderstorm. By the next morning, every local paper and evening news station from Des Moines to St. Louis carried the same headline: Walker family scandal, son arrested, in fraud investigation, elder brother vindicated. For the first time in decades, my name wasn't whispered with pity or dismissed as just the quiet one. Folks looked me in the eye again. Some even apologized for believing Evelyn's lies. But while the crowd had cheered me, that day, victory came with a weight heavier than any loss I'd known. Caleb's arrest didn't end things, it opened a floodgate. State investigators stormed the ranch within 48 hours, unearthing not just one forged loan, but a chain of fraudulent financial schemes spanning years. Evelyn's signature appeared on several shady contracts too, painting her not as a passive bystander, but as Caleb's willing partner. The bank froze Walker Farm's accounts. Lawsuits stacked higher than hay bales in the dead of winter. I should have felt triumph, but watching Caleb's mugshot flash on TV and hearing Evelyn's name called during a state inquiry felt like standing in the ashes of a house I once loved. This wasn't just justice. It was my own family collapsing in public. 3 days later, I drove back to the ranch for the first time since being thrown out. The gates hung crooked grass, overgrown paint, peeling from the barn I'd once kept spotless. I found Evelyn on the porch, sitting alone with a whiskey glass trembling in her hand. She didn't look like the imperious matriarch who'd humiliated me in front of kin. She looked like a woman defeated her carefully woven web finally unraveled. When she saw me, she straightened, but couldn't quite meet my eyes. "They say Caleb could face 10 years, she said quietly. I nodded. "And you might too," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Evelyn flinched, clutching the glass tighter. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind whistled through broken shutters, the only sound on land that used to hum with life. Finally, Evelyn whispered, I thought he'd bring more than you ever could. You never wanted the spotlight, Daniel. I didn't see the leader in you until it was too late. Part of me wanted to spit every bitter word I'd swallowed over the years, to tell her how many birthdays I'd missed fixing fences, how many nights I stayed up saving her ranch while she gambled it away on Caleb's future. But standing there, watching her hands tremble, all I felt was an aching sadness. I never needed the spotlight, I said softly. Just a little respect. Grace later told me I had every right to take everything Sue Evelyn, strip her of the ranch press full charges, until she and Caleb were ruined beyond repair. And Lord knows there were nights I imagined doing exactly that. But as weeks passed and court dates loomed, something shifted in me. I'd fought my entire life for this land, but tearing my family limb from limb in public. That wasn't justice. That was vengeance, and I wasn't sure I wanted that on my soul. When the state offered a settlement, allowing me to assume control of Walker Farms in exchange for dropping the harshest penalties against Evelyn, I agreed. Caleb had to face trial, and whatever sentence the law saw fit, he'd crossed too many lines to escape consequences. But Evelyn, she was allowed to stay on the ranch not as a queen reigning over it, but as an aging woman facing the truth of her choices. Taking back the ranch was bittersweet. I walked through those front doors again, past Dad's old photograph, and felt both pride and grief wash over me. Emily ran ahead, exploring rooms that were rightfully ours again, while Grace and I mapped out how to rebuild from the wreckage Caleb left behind. That night, Evelyn knocked on my office door. She stood there without makeup or jewelry, just a simple cardigan and tired eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, voice cracking. "I may never earn your forgiveness. But thank you for not throwing me out like I did you." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured her a glass of water, motioned for her to sit, and said, "This land doesn't survive on pride or lies anymore. If you want to stay, you work for it. Same as anyone else." She nodded, silently, tears slipping down her cheeks. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. A year passed since that stormy summer, when the Walker name nearly crumbled to dust. Seasons turned over the ranch like pages in a book, each one writing a story I'd never thought I'd live. The land had been broken, the family torn apart, and yet Somehow, both began to heal. By spring, fresh paint covered the barn's weathered boards. Fences stood straight and strong, and green pastures rolled out like velvet under the Midwest sun. Emily rode horseback again, her laughter echoing through fields that once knew only quiet grief. We started new programs for local youth teaching farm skills, offering scholarships to kids like me who once thought dreams had to be sacrificed for duty. Walker Farms was no longer a monument to power struggles and favoritism. It was a home rebuilt on fairness and hard-earned redemption. Caleb's trial came and went. He served time for forgery and fraud, and when he walked out 2 years later, I met him at the gate, not with anger, but with a firm handshake. "You've got a lot to fix," I told him, handing him a pair of work gloves. He didn't speak, just nodded, a flicker of humility I'd never seen before sparking in his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the first stone laid on that long road. Evelyn changed too, though slowly, like an old tree learning to bend after decades of standing rigid. She spent days mucking stalls and hauling hay, her manicured hands blistered but determined. Sometimes we'd share coffee on the porch, silence filling the space where accusations once lived. One morning, as the sun painted the sky gold, she looked at me and whispered, "I see it now. You were the leader all along." I just refused to believe quiet strength could be real strength. I didn't say anything, but for the first time, I believed she meant it. Grace stayed by my side through every step, helping turn chaos into order, teaching me not just how to win battles, but how to build something lasting. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, we stood by the oak tree Dad carved our initials into, the same tree where in my darkest night I'd sworn to rise again. Grace touched the old carvings and said, "You kept the promise to yourself. Not for revenge, but for justice." I looked out at the land alive again and realized she was right. I hadn't just reclaimed Walker Farms, I'd reclaimed myself. The boy who once bowed his head in every family argument was gone. In his place stood a man who knew his worth wasn't measured by titles, inheritance papers, or anyone else's approval. Now every dawn breaks with peace I never thought I'd feel. I wake up, sip coffee on that same porch Evelyn once banished me from, and watch Emily ride past the barn with Caleb fixing fence lines in the distance. The Walker family is still imperfect, still scarred, but no longer built on lies. And if you've stuck with me through this entire story, remember this family doesn't mean the ones who share your blood. It means the ones who stand with you when the storm hits, who see your worth when others try to bury it. If someone has cast you out, told you you're not enough, or stolen what's rightfully yours, don't let them define your ending. Like the old oak tree standing tall after every storm, you can carve your own name back into life. Quietly, steadily, and stronger than ever before. So tell me, if you had been in my boots, what would you have done? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story gave you even a spark of hope, share it with someone who needs to know that no betrayal, no injustice can bury a soul that refuses to give up. Because here on Walker Land, we've learned the hardest way possible storms don't destroy you. They forge you.